When you have quantitative and qualitative data, knowing how to write that up can be tricky. Do you separate them? Do you keep them together? How do you even go about figuring that out? Don't worry, because I'm going to give you some advice about that in this video. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Yardley, and I've been supporting postgrad and PhD students for the last 20 years. Now, in that time, mixed methods research has become super popular. It is much more mainstream than it ever used to be. But when it comes to finding guidance on how to write up this kind of research, that's not particularly easy. So in this video, I'm going to help you start thinking through what to do with yours. This video is the last in my 4-part series all about the findings chapter. In the first video, I looked at whether or not you should refer back to the literature in the findings chapter, and in the second and third videos, I looked at what to do with qualitative and quantitative data. So if you need help with any of that stuff, do go and check those videos out. I will put some links to them in the description. But back to this video on how to write up mixed methods findings, I'm going to start off by looking at how you decide whether to write them up separately or whether to write them up together. And then I'm going to give you some tips on what to do, whichever of those approaches you decide to take. So separate or integrated, how do you go about deciding that? Well, you won't be surprised to hear me say that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach here. I can't turn around and say person A should absolutely write up separately, person B should absolutely write up in an integrated fashion. It's all going to depend on a number of things. And the key things to look at here are firstly your own research aims, but secondly the conventions within your discipline. So your first port of call here is your supervisor. So go and talk to your supervisor about this and have that conversation with them about whether you should follow the standard practices in your discipline, or is there a compelling reason to go against the grain? For example, your research aims might justify that. So go and have that chat with them, because that is the best place to begin. For some students, it will make perfect sense to write up separately because their research consists of a series of small studies, each of which have different aims and are going to be collecting different types of data. And psychology is an example of a discipline where this is quite common. Often psychological research consists of a series of small studies, a series of steps along a journey. And it makes sense to keep those things separate because the research aims and the research objectives are different for each individual study that they do. So you just maintain clarity and focus by dedicating specific sections to different types of data. On the other hand, for some students, it makes sense to write things up in an integrated way because when they bring the different types of data together, they complement one another and they allow you to have insights that you would never have generated had you kept them distinct. Let's now take a look at some examples where there is a clear case for either keeping qualitative and quantitative separate or bringing them together. So we'll start by looking at some examples where it's appropriate to keep things separate. So in this first scenario, we've got a psychology PhD student who's studying cognitive development in children. They have separate studies, and one study is cognitive tests, which is going to generate quantitative data. Another study is in-depth interviews with children to understand their thought processes, and that will generate qualitative data. So what's the rationale for writing this up separately? Well, each study has different objectives and methodologies. The quantitative component is measuring cognitive abilities, and the qualitative component is generating some insights into the thought processes of children. So by keeping these things separate, we're maintaining clarity because of those different objectives and those different methodologies. In the second scenario, we've got a public health study, and this is looking to identify factors which are associated with a high rate of substance abuse within a particular community. We've got some quantitative surveys in this piece of research, so that's going to generate statistical data on substance use patterns, but we've also got qualitative interviews, and that's going to identify social and cultural factors that influence people's behaviour. So why would we write this up separately? Well, given the complexity of substance abuse, the research is going to benefit from separate components. We've got the quantitative data, which is telling us about prevalence rates, and then we've got the qualitative data that gives us that in-depth context, and it makes it more suitable to separate these things because they are focusing on quite different elements of the issue. Let's now have a look at some scenarios where it's appropriate to integrate the writing up of quantitative and qualitative data. So here's a scenario where we've got an evaluation of a summer school programme, and it's essentially trying to find out what the impact was on student performance. We've got quantitative data in this evaluation, and that includes things like test scores, attendance rates and grades. We've also got qualitative data. So we have focus groups and interviews, which are looking to provide insights into the programme's teaching methods and the experiences of the students who are taking the summer school programme. So why would we write these up together? Well, integration offers us a more comprehensive view than we get if we wrote them up separately. So we've got the quantitative data demonstrating statistical changes, and the qualitative data is linked to that because it's explaining how and why these changes occurred. And in this scenario, we've got an environmental research project, which is assessing the success of a conservation initiative. In this study, there is quantitative data, which is measuring changes in biodiversity and habitat restoration. And there's also qualitative data from community interviews, which is going to capture the local perceptions and attitudes and people's involvement in the conservation effort. So why would we write this up together? Well, again, integrating these different types of data is going to provide us with a holistic understanding. We've got the quantitative data that are confirming the ecological changes. And we've got the qualitative data, which is revealing how invested the community are in achieving those changes and also identifying potential challenges in sustaining the conservation efforts. So have a think about those examples and whether any of those details have resonated with you, whether you thought, oh, that is quite similar actually to what I'm doing in my study, or whether they were completely different from what you're doing in your study. But they're helpful just in getting you thinking about what approach that you might take. So consider them, ponder them, go chat to your supervisor. When you've made a decision about whether to write up separately or in an integrated way, you're going to need some help in terms of structuring your findings chapter, and that's what we're looking at next. So firstly, writing up separately. I would say the first thing that you need to do in the introduction to your findings chapter is explain that you're writing this data up separately, because your examiner wants to know that. They need to know that before they start reading your findings chapter so they know what's going on. And you also need to explain your rationale for writing it up separately. So what is the justification for that? Why have you chosen to write it up in that way? Then at the beginning of each of the separate sections where you're presenting different types of data, be really clear about your aims for this particular element of your research. What were you trying to achieve by collecting the quantitative data? And then when you get onto the qualitative section, what were you trying to achieve by collecting the qualitative data? It's about stating the obvious, and I've talked about this a little bit in the previous videos that I've done, but so many students don't take the time to state the obvious because I think you're so into your research that it can be difficult sometimes to look at it from the perspective of somebody encountering it for the first time, but really important to do that. So in each of the sections, explain what your aims were. Then you need to present your data and be really aware of some of the common issues and some of the common errors that students often make when they are presenting the different types of data. Now, the two videos prior to this one are all about that. So for tips on presenting qualitative data, check out this one up here. And for tips on presenting quantitative data, check out this one here. It's also really important when we're thinking about writing up the different types of data separately to talk about bridging between the different sections. So when you get to the end of a section on, say, your quantitative data, be really clear about what that data has enabled you to discover and the questions that it's answered, but also mention what it hasn't helped you to do, and then use that as a way to transition to the next chapter in which you're presenting the qualitative data. So you're saying, hey, here's what the quantitative data revealed, this is all great, etc. However, it hasn't allowed me to answer this question, and for this, we need to look to the qualitative data. So by doing that kind of thing, you get a really smooth transition from one section to the next, and your examiner will very much appreciate that. Here are some examples of sentences that you might use when you're transitioning from one section to the next. So get ready to take some screenshots. Next, moving on to look at some tips for writing up the findings together, writing them up in an integrated way. And the advice that I'm going to give is exactly the same as the advice I gave for writing up separately. So you need to tell the person reading the findings chapter in the introduction to the findings chapter that you are indeed intending to write them up in an integrated way, and explain why you did that. Why was it better to write up in an integrated way than it was to keep them separate? And by doing this, the examiner who's going to be reading your thesis is really clear on why you've gone about things in the way that you have. So what do you do from there? For this one, we need an example. So let's have a look at a study examining the accessibility of healthcare. So how easy or not is it for people to access the healthcare that they need? So the first thing that you need to do is arrange your findings using clear headings or themes which cut across the different types of data. That might be based on your research questions or on the key elements of the topic that you've been looking at. So in the example, key themes might include things like barriers to access and patient experiences. Then make sure that for each theme, you've got some questions that you need to ask yourself as you're writing up to ensure that you don't get into too much of a mess. So, for example, what is going on within this theme? Are the findings under this theme consistent with each other? If so, why? If not, why not? How does the qualitative explain the quantitative and vice versa? How do these two types of data come together? Are there any instances where they are completely at odds, and why might that be? Within each of your themes, explain how these different types of data are enabling you to generate holistic insights into what you've been studying. So think about consistency and similarity. Emphasise how the quantitative and the qualitative complement each other within each of the themes. Showcase how they offer different dimensions of understanding. So, for example, in the patient experiences theme, you might demonstrate how quantitative satisfaction scores align with the narratives that have been shared by patients in qualitative interviews. However, you also want to look at divergence and difference, so use your integrated approach to uncover insights or patterns that might not be evident when analysing each data type separately. And this is where the true value of mixed methods research emerges. So, for example, within the theme of patient experiences, again, the integration of quantitative data might reveal that the satisfaction scores are high, but qualitative data could show that some patients are actually still quite unhappy due to long wait times. It is incredibly easy to get mixed up and to find yourself in a right old mess when you're writing up in an integrated way. So if that happens, don't worry. Just go back to the theme that you're focusing on and remind yourself of the questions that I was talking about a moment ago. And just to recap, here they are. So that's it. Those are my helpful pointers on mixed methods findings and writing them all up. So in this video, we have covered how to decide whether to write up separately or write up together, some tips for writing up separately, and some tips for writing up together. I hope you found that helpful, and this concludes my series on all things findings chapters, so be sure to go and check out the other videos, and I will see you back here very soon for my next one.